kind of supporting that reading intervention and the reading work that's being done is explaining to parents that they don't have to be the ones that teach their child how to read. It's not
Right.
their job to do that. And there's lots of ways to support that kind of work that happens at school and with teachers that isn't, you know, parent driven.
Right.
So I always encourage parents to not take on that whole burden because it is really overwhelming. I remember as a parent of young kids, how I felt like I should be teaching my kids how to read. I had all this reading experience, and then, the kids, people would be like, well, your kids will probably learn to read really quickly because of the work that you do. And I said, that's not really necessarily the case.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Brighter Together podcast. My name is Janet Courtney, and my guest today is Jon Arens. Jon is a school administrator, and he's worn lots of hats. He's been a principal, a special education director, and he is also a formal special education teacher. And he is joining us from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Jon, it's great to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me.
So tell everybody a little bit about your background and kind of some of the cool stuff you've done in your career.
So I went into teaching as a second career. I was in consulting before I was a teacher. And obviously, when you get a taste of teaching, which for me was through coaching, I worked with two special education teachers when I was coaching, and they were the ones that really convinced me to go into special education. So when I moved to Milwaukee, I went back to school, got my teaching license. I worked on an emergency license throughout the first 2 years that I was going to school full time. While I was getting my teaching license, I worked in a school in Milwaukee Public Schools that had a self-contained behavioral room. That's where I started my career. And then from there, I went to a district to the north of us that was like a semi-rural district, and then went back towards Milwaukee to a suburban district, and then one more district before I became an administrator. So then I got my director of pupil services license, which in Wisconsin is the license that you need to be a special education director. And then for the last 3 years, I was a special education director as well. So I've definitely seen a lot of different things. I've worked with lots of different types of special education teachers, especially speech teachers, which I know you were one.
Yeah,
So
I'm an SLP. Yeah.
spent a lot of time with speech teachers over the years. And in the last couple of years, the big thing in the state of Wisconsin has been Act 20, which is a law that was passed in Wisconsin that is ideally supposed to help fund a return to more like phonics-based reading approaches, the science of reading, kind of based off of the whole Sold a Story podcast and story that came out of the New York Times a few years ago. So that work has been really exciting to watch. It's still kind of in the final stages of figuring out like who's going to pay for what and everything
Right.
like that. But
It's always about the money, isn't it? It's always about.
yes, but it has been really good to see how schools have been implementing it. And honestly, for a state that is kind of as locked in on politics and everything as Wisconsin is, I think it's actually come a long way, and it's been a pretty good show of collaboration by the government and the local school boards and our state DPI. So I've been very involved in that. When I was getting my master's, my thesis was actually on reading intervention and how it kind of drops off from being a really hard model in the elementary school ages. And then once you get into the secondary ages, who is providing reading intervention really changes, and the structure of it really changes. Most reading intervention programs are designed for much younger kids than they are used to service when the secondary level. So my work really revolved around how do we keep reading intervention going at the secondary level with all the things that happen as a secondary teacher in terms of, their interest level drops. Like, how do you engage with them in
Hmm.
ways that are not, quote unquote, little kid activities. So a lot of my work was going off of what I had seen really work with speech language pathologists and literacy teachers at the secondary level who, for my money, provide the best reading intervention and instruction at the secondary level, and then trying to figure out how, as a special education teacher, I could support that work and ultimately lead that work. So, um, yeah, long story short, I've been very involved in reading intervention during my career, and I think it's really important work. And I'm really excited with kind of the direction things are going, both and in Wisconsin and nationally in terms of the progress towards really addressing reading as a major issue that we can tackle as an educated, populace.
Yeah, because you have to learn to read and then you read to learn, right?
Right. And no one remembers how they learn how to read, which is,
Yeah.
it's kind of, I think that's something that comes up a lot with parents, especially, is that they want to teach their kid how to read. And it's such a specialized skill set. And in Wisconsin, you need a special license for it. I assume that's in most states as well. And most people have no recollection of learning how to read. They just assume that one day they started reading like they started walking, and that's really not how it works.
No,
And
for sure.
so I think a big part of the work in terms of um, kind of supporting that reading intervention and the reading work that's being done is explaining to parents that they don't have to be the ones that teach their child how to read. It's not
Right.
their job to do that. And there's lots of ways to support that kind of work that happens at school and with teachers that isn't, you know, parent driven. So,
Right.
um,
Right.
so yeah, so I always encourage parents to not take on that whole burden because it is really overwhelming. I remember as a parent of, young kids, how I felt like I should be teaching my kids how to read. I've, had all this reading experience, and then, you know, the kids, people would be like, well, your kids will probably learn to read really quickly because of the work that you do. And I said, that's not really necessarily the case.
There is a crisis in this country, a massive shortage of special education teachers. We know how devastating this can be for your students, families, and staff. Lighthouse Therapy places experienced special education teachers in virtual, hybrid, and on-site roles, and we handle everything from hiring to onboarding to mentorship. These aren't just placements, they're professionals who understand compliance, collaboration, and care. Let us help you fill in the gaps with special education teachers who really understand. We are here to help. Visit lighthouse-therapy.com/brighter together to connect with us today. So when you've talked about the reading programs and what's going, and a lot of people are talking about dyslexia. I, as a therapist early on in my career, as speech therapist, they didn't teach us about dyslexia, even though it was kind of like one of those weird carve outs. Special education teachers and reading specialists, they were the dyslexia people, and speech therapists. No, I'm 30 years ago, we were always like hands off when it came to dyslexia, but it's kind of crazy because dyslexia is a language disorder and it's a reading disorder. So how do you see that changing, and with what your research has been and what you guys are doing in Wisconsin, how do you see that like tying into all of that?
That's a really good question. We get that question a lot in special education. A lot of people think that they can only get services, for example, if they have a dyslexia diagnosis. And I have to often explain to them that that's not a prerequisite for getting
Right.
services or special education services. Um, and the idea that diagnosis or going through a dyslexia evaluation, which can be really hard to get. There's not a whole lot of centers, at least in Milwaukee. There's not a whole lot of centers. Um, so the, wait list for those can be really long. And I never want parents to feel like that is the, the barrier to them getting support for their child. You can have you know, a guess, or, maybe someone in your family was diagnosed with dyslexia, and it's something that your family is familiar with. But I never want parents to feel like that's something that they have to have. It's, dyslexia is not a label within special education. And I think that that's a really big misconception that I hear
Hmm.
a lot of. And unfortunately, I would be willing to bet that, half the time that people that think that their child has dyslexia, um, half the time they spend just waiting for, you know, to get into someone when they could have just gone to the school and said, "Hey, I have concerns about reading. Can we look at getting, my son or daughter evaluated to look at, reading concerns through the special education programming." A lot of that testing is going to be really similar to what
Oh yeah.
go
Oh yeah.
through for a dyslexia screener.
Hmm.
Schools
And
also
you
don't do,
can,
yeah.
yeah, you can find it. You can, and speech therapists don't get me wrong here. I mean, there are speech therapists that are amazing with dyslexia. I'm just not one of them. And I feel like it's a shortcut. I'm glad I don't do therapy anymore because I can't. I can't run a company like I do, as big as we are, and do therapy, which was one of the things that was hardest for me to give up, was not doing therapy anymore. But there are some, and Lighthouse has some of them. We have some amazing therapists that they hone in, they understand reading and how it works. And boy, that kid has dyslexia. We need to address it and find it, and even if they miss it, you can, as a therapist is working on reading comprehensions and those things, there's very definite markers that identify a child as having dyslexia, and you can go, wait a minute, I think we know what's going on here, and it can be addressed from a reading perspective and from a therapist perspective. And I think it's the best marriage is when they both do it, when we're working together as a team, to help that child. And that's the whole point, right? We want the kids to learn
Yeah.
to
You
read.
don't need a specific person per se, I don't think, to to work with students that are struggling in that area. I think
Hmm.
that, you know, kind of the last thing I was going to say regarding kind of like the school's role in that is, a lot of times we get asked if we can do the dyslexia screener, and schools don't typically do dyslexia screeners, at least in Wisconsin. There isn't one that is, used by school psychologists or speech paths or anything like that. Um, so yeah, I think that that's something that we do hear a lot in kind of the special education director world, is concerns about that. And I always try to, similar to what I just told you, is
Yeah.
give them kind of like the reassure them that that's not something that has to happen in order for them to be addressing concerns that they have with their child's reading or speaking or anything like that.
Hmm.
So I think
Hmm.
that's really important. And it is um, dyslexia is a huge buzzword in early education, also in secondary education. And for a while there, I think you alluded to it, there was this kind of idea that, we weren't gonna, that was something that was like over here, and like not something that we
Hmm.
did. And it was always like, you were always like telling people that that wasn't something that you did or that we did. And I think that that's kind of eroding away a little bit, which is,
Oh yeah, I hope so. I really do. I mean, it is
hear it a lot,
definitely something. Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is,
And the problem is that sometimes I think parents, especially parents, I mean, everybody loves their kids. You love your kids. You want what's best for your kids. And if you see something and your child has even one marker that they see, oh, my child does that. Well, oh my gosh, they're dyslexic,
of course.
that may not be the case. It may be that there's something else going on. And so let the school do the assessment. Let's figure out the whole picture. I mean, you can't just, and this is something I've told parents a million times, is like, we don't treat the disability, we work with the child and help the child to get access to education. That's the whole point of IDA, right? Let's get them and a way to get that information. Let's find ways to help them to process the information, ways to read the information, ways to access what's happening in the classroom through what we're doing, whether it's as a speech therapist or the teacher or the reading specialist or whatever. We're all on the same team. We're all here to make sure that that child, your child, gets the education that they deserve and that you want for them. And I think even when you get into antagonistic, when you talk about due process and a parent that's not happy, and we don't have to go down that road, but it's like the bottom line is we all want what's best for your child, and that's for them to get a good education. And that's the point of Brighter Together, is we're talking about the fact that we have so many amazing people in this country that are fighting for your child to get a good education. Right.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's a misconception that there's kind of a Tower of Babel situation that happens with, IEP teams and school teams in general, where if there's too many people in the room, things don't happen. I would make the argument that that's not how it works. I think it works that way in a lot of business and a lot of parts of your life. You don't want a lot of voices, but I think that in this context of a school, having a lot of voices in a room allows you to have a lot of data points in the room, and what your child could be doing in one class could be completely different than what they're doing in another class. And unless you have those people in the room, you're not going to know it.
Right. For sure. Well, Jon, great conversation. Where should people go if they want to learn a little bit more about you and what you're doing?
I don't have as visible of a platform as I probably would like to have, but I am trying to do more and get out there more and talk about some of the kind of barriers and things that I've seen a lot in my work, and just try to kind of make the whole special education system and process for parents less intimidating. So I think, yeah, hopefully I'll, in the next year or so, try to kind of expand some of that.
Are you on LinkedIn?
I am on LinkedIn.
Okay.
I am
That's
not
one
a
place.
crazy LinkedIn person, though. I make fun of all my friends who are. So I might have to get sucked into that from a professional level eventually. But yeah, I mean, I think that the conversations and kind of removing that stigma is really the most important work that special education administrators do. And I'm happy to answer any questions, or anytime I can be a part of, making that conversation easier for parents to go through. I'm more than happy to.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much for being on Brighter Together, because, we really are brighter together. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.